Well, look who's come crawling back. I knew you couldn't get enough of me and my inner machinations. The last time I talked about Zelda was way back in January, and since then we've seen the release of the Nintendo Switch 2, along with upgraded versions of both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, including Zelda Notes, which has been an absolute treat to go through. But rather than focus on the new stuff, I've decided to go back and tackle one big mystery spanning across both Zelda titles, that being the Lomei Labyrinths. So, sit back and relax as we cover the lore of one of Zelda's most interesting and amazing structures. In Breath of the Wild, there are 3 labyrinths scattered across Hyrule, the North and South Lomei Labyrinths found in the Hebra and Gerudo regions, and lastly, Lomei Labyrinth Island. As the name suggests, this one is separate from the mainland, within the Akala region. The term Lomei comes from the Japanese word for maze, with the former being an anagram. While labyrinths are sometimes referred to as mazes, the two terms are synonymous with one another. However, the game always uses the term labyrinth when talking about them. Zelda comments on how the labyrinths were named after Lomei, and the way she words it is interesting. Almost as if Lomei is a tangible thing or concept in the Zelda universe. But maybe the people are already aware that it's an anagram for the term maze. At the center of each labyrinth is a Sheikah shrine, with each holding a different piece of the barbarian armor, once worn by a warlike tribe in the Faron region. More on that later. It's possible that these mazes were inspired by the Minotaur. In Greek mythology, the Minotaur was imprisoned within a gigantic labyrinthine structure at the very center of the maze. Every 9 years, 14 people were sent to the labyrinth as sacrificial offerings. In the tale, a man named Minos is given a snow-white bull. Rather than sacrifice it, he instead keeps it, angering Poseidon, who then makes his wife fall in love with the animal. After she gives birth to Asterius, a half-man, half-bull, the Minotaur loses control, attacking the people. In response, a labyrinth is constructed to imprison the creature. Visually, the barbarian armor found within Breath of the Wild's labyrinths is based off of a similar thing, resembling that of a Lionel, or even Ganon's beast form. The barbarian armor also mentions how wearing it draws out your inner animal, increasing your strength and battle prowess. It's possible that the set was inspired by the Minotaur, especially since these items are hidden away within shrines found at the very center of labyrinths, not unlike our story. Well, I suppose the same can't be said for Akala's, since that shrine isn't exactly found in the middle. What's made abundantly clear about these labyrinths is that they have a very bad reputation among the travelers, with most spreading negativity about them. It's similar to the Lost Woods, in that people go out of their way to avoid them in fear of getting lost. One particularly sad case involves a man named Monkton, who dared his friend Harry to venture in as a test of courage, only to never see him again. While it's later revealed that Harry was simply a horse, it goes to show the danger these mazes pose. The maze referenced in the story is the North Lomei Labyrinth, home to several dangerous monsters including Lizalfos. It's likely that Harry got lost in the labyrinth, eventually falling into the hands of the monsters who probably ate him. I suppose you could say that this is a monster maze. In truth, the labyrinths are only one of many Zonai structures housing Sheikah shrines, leading to the inevitable question of what relation they had to this mysterious group. At the time, the most commonly accepted answer was that the Sheikah built some of their shrines around these already existing ruins, ones which have been around long before the creation of Sheikah technology. I even suggested that perhaps these mazes were made by the Sheikah themselves, meant to replicate Zonai architecture, given how blocky and manufactured they look. But Tears of the Kingdom makes it pretty clear that these structures are of Zonai origin, with the existence of ones in both the sky and depths, the trials connected to them, and how the more ancient Zonai architecture shares that smooth and sleek look. Activating the Dragon Rain found in the Labyrinth Center unlocks their respective sky counterparts, and seeking out the 4 terminals of each opens up the final challenge, located within Hyrule's depths. Defeating the Flux construct inside marks the end of the trial, rewarding Link with a piece of the Phantom Ganon armor set, now called the Evil Spirit Armor. But there's still many questions surrounding the maze, with the sequel quite literally adding more layers to this mystery, to the point where even the game itself makes a mention of it in the adventure log. What's by far the most interesting bit of lore comes from the beginning of these quests, right after Link makes his way through the surface mazes with the help of the Zonai survey team. An otherworldly voice speaks to the hero, calling themselves the ruler of boars, owls, or dragons, depending on which maze you're completing. Most of Breath of the Wild's Zonai architecture is based off of these three animals, with developer quotes from Masterworks going into more detail, with each representing a piece of the Triforce, albeit from a more primitive or ancient perspective. The dragon, owl, and boar symbolizing the virtues of courage, wisdom, and power respectively. The book even includes some scrapped concept art of the pillars found all across Hyrule, where a dragon is depicted rising from the ground, consuming the platform, a design which may have instead been used for the lamps, given the similarities. You'd expect each maze to be a test of their respective virtues, however, each labyrinth is actually a test of all three. First is having to navigate the maze to find and activate all four terminals, a test of wisdom. Second is diving down to the labyrinth within the depths, with the game quite literally telling you to prove your courage, regardless of what maze it is. Finally, overcoming the flux construct found inside of the labyrinth, demonstrating Link's power. But who exactly were these rulers of boars, owls, and dragons? Since the labyrinth's origins are clearly related to the Zonai, it's not a stretch to believe that the three rulers referenced in the quest are also Zonai. Since the boar, owl, and dragon are based off of three different pieces of the Triforce, perhaps the Zonai were a group divided into three different sub-factions, each having its own ruler. While Tears of the Kingdom only goes as far as Raru's era, we're told of a time when the Zonai had much more influence on Hyrule, before mysteriously vanishing. Even Raru himself is ignorant to his ancestors' past, recounting tales and legends about the numerous Zonai structures, including the mazes. It's clear that he is as much in the dark as anyone else, likely due to the fact that he and his sister are the only Zonai remaining in Hyrule. Masterworks also refers to the labyrinths as castles in the Japanese translations. And one interesting detail is the naming of these ruins in Tears of the Kingdom, specifically the ones located within the sky. While Akala's is simply named the Lomei Sky Labyrinth, the ones above the Hebra and Gerudo Labyrinths are instead called the North and South Lomei Castle top floors. It does make you wonder if these were originally one massive structure, later split into different segments. But regardless, it makes sense if the Zonai referred to the labyrinths as castles in the past, since each one has a ruler. Another interesting detail is how all chest loot found in Tears of the Kingdom's labyrinths is exclusively Zonai gear, things like construct and Zonite weapons, charges, and Zonai devices, in contrast to Breath of the Wild where there was an assortment of items. Even the bosses that Link fights in the depths are related to the Zonai. Many of the smaller, broken down constructs are also present in the underground mazes. Unlike other parts of the world where chasms have opened up thanks to the upheaval, the tunnels connecting the surface labyrinths to the ones in the depths are man-made, using the same building material as the mazes, which suggests that these tunnels date back to the era of the Zonai, although Gloom still has managed to make its way in despite the difference. But are there any other hints in this game that point towards the voice's owners? Both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom's quest logs are interesting in that they record not only the information of the quest, but also the person who gives it. Throughout the game, there are numerous voices that speak to us, most of which are named. The voice Link hears at the end of each shrine is assumed to be Raru's, but is later confirmed with the Shrine Explorer quest the player receives after collecting all 152 Lights of Blessing. The one coming from the toppled goddess statue at the Forgotten Temple is called Goddess Statue, the Horn Statue, you get the idea. But some of these instead use Mysterious Voice as the quest giver, including the 3 Labyrinth trials. In contrast, Breath of the Wild simply lists it as whenever the source of the voice is unclear. Mysterious Voice is also used for other occasions like the Call from the Depths and Shrine Crystal quests. However, like the former, it doesn't mean there's any sort of correlation between the separate quest givers. In fact, we as a player know that these voices are different since it's later revealed that the one communicating to Link through the Great Plateau's Bargainer statue is, well, the Bargainer statue. And once Link returns the Sky Crystals to their respective shrines, the voice states that it'll grant the player a light that banishes evil, making this voice Raru's. It's also possible that these voices Link hears in the labyrinths are related to Dinraal, Naedra, and Farosh, 3 elemental dragon spirits named after the golden goddesses Din, Nehru, and Furor, with those goddesses linked to the 3 pieces of the Triforce, much like how the rulers of owls, dragons, and boars are. Not only are there Zonai armor sets of all 3, but it's common belief that these dragons were once Zonai, who consumed secret stones and underwent draconification. However, it's also said that to become an immortal dragon is to lose oneself, which is exactly what happens to Zelda. The fragment of her Link interacts with at the Temple of Time never speaks to him, nor does her or Ganondorf's dragon forms. The same is true for Dinraal, Naedra, and Farosh. The only time Link does hear her voice is just before jumping off the Great Sky Island, although since we hear Zelda say this same line in the past, it could be due to Recall's power, or an echo as Rauru speculates. Yet the voices which speak to Link have a clear sense of self. If these three dragons were born from draconification and not something else, then it sounds impossible. Plus, you'd expect the rulers of owls and boars to take on forms related to those animals, and not the dragon, which is linked to courage. Chances are these rulers have nothing to do with any present-day person or entity. On the topic of entities, the other biggest mystery surrounding these labyrinths is the treasure within. Each maze holds a piece of the Phantom Ganon armor set. Many outfits were added as DLC for Breath of the Wild and brought over to Tears of the Kingdom. However, since it started as DLC, the relevance to the lore has always been questioned. The simplest explanation is that these armor pieces continue to be non-canon to the story.
Oh my gosh, is that a Zonai swirl?
Tears of the Kingdom does make an effort to integrate them into numerous side quests and other things, but the game still scatters many of them across the depths, with maps leading to them hidden on the Sky Islands. The description of the Phantom Ganon set is the same as Breath of the Wild's, with some believing that the armor is inspired by a dark entity resembling the Great King of Evil, obviously referring to Phantom Ganon. The mysterious voice also describes it as an armor wreathed in otherworldly evil, hidden away since days of old. If the rumors really are true, perhaps the labyrinths were used to seal away a previous incarnation of Phantom Ganon. Maybe the purpose of the trial is to find someone strong enough in body, skill, and mind so that they can wear it without getting influenced by its dark powers. Kind of like the fear surrounding Majora's Mask and its use. Unlike the surface labyrinths, where the reward is a shrine, the same isn't true for the others. The ones in the sky are located just outside of the maze, and while no shrines are found within the depths, only one light route can be seen as a reward for completing the quest, as that's the only way to access it. It suggests that the sole purpose of these Lomei Labyrinth prophecies is to bestow the armor to a strong-willed individual. One of the game's NPCs mentions a rumor of rare clothes stashed somewhere on Lomei Labyrinth Island. However, the only clothes found here are the ones in the depths. Either knowledge of it reached the people, or they're referring to Breath of the Wild's barbarian armor, since that used to be the reward for completing the mazes. Zelda notes provide some additional information, although most of the interesting bits come from Rauru's perspective. Zelda only mentions how the North Lomei Labyrinth once held an ancient relic meant for the hero, that being the Sheikah Shrine, and Koga's voice line says nothing about the labyrinth itself. According to Rauru, it's said that souls will wander the halls of these labyrinths until its guardian offers guidance. The one about the South Lomei Castle top floor instead states that a soul wanders aimlessly until the Guardian of Power, said to reach from depths to sky, has cleansed them of their pride. Since it's presented as a story, what Rauru says shouldn't be taken at face value. The part about the Guardian of Power's reach likely comes from how Link can hear its voice regardless of the layer he's in. But it does bring up the possibility that these voices never had physical bodies to begin with. The Zonai are described as gods to the Hylians, since they came from the heavens. But what if these mysterious voices belong to deities that the Zonai themselves worshipped, whether it be related to the Golden Goddesses themselves or some other entity? I didn't have time to expand on it previously, but one possible explanation for all of this is Bunshin, a concept stemming from Shintoism. It translates to copy or duplicate, even words like alter ego or doppelganger. It's a copy the god makes of itself that's considered separate to the main body, although still part of the god. Remember the part where I mentioned that the voice Link hears at the end of each Shrine of Light is Rauru's? Well, if that's the case, it's strange that he talks as if he's a completely different person. But perhaps the voices linked to these individual trials are also a form of Bunshin, explaining why they share Rauru's voice, but not his memories. In fact, this aligns with the lore of the shrines, as Rauru states that he filled each with light that purges evil long ago. This quote-unquote light may also be perceived as a copy or Bunshin of himself. My knowledge of this topic is very limited, although it may also explain how these voices could belong to the three dragons, if they had left a Bunshin of themselves in the mazes before undergoing draconification, although that falls under speculation. One thing consistent across all 3 sky labyrinths is that judgment was passed on those within its walls. What was judged depended on the mazes. Those boastful of their power, those whose hearts were filled with deceit, or the weight of a soul's courage. It comes off as much more intimidating when compared to the trial Link is put through. Rather than a test, it feels like a courtroom, very fitting for something described as a castle, which also has a ruler, like a king passing judgment onto his subjects. The labyrinths may have even acted as a prison, since souls are said to wander aimlessly until guided by its guardian, especially since the one above the Gerudo region mentions a cleansing of pride. Once these people were cleansed of their sins, they were guided out of the mazes. It's also possible that this judgment is related to the appearance of the Phantom Ganon armor, found in the labyrinth's depths. Previously, I talked about how each maze actually tests all 3 virtues of the Triforce, despite having separate rulers of the Owl, Dragon, and Boar. Its purpose may have changed over the many years, now acting as a trial for those qualified to enter. Throughout the game, it's established that Link is the only one in the present who can use Zonai-locked mechanisms such as chests or dragon reins. The Zonai survey team could only get as far as the center of the surface labyrinths before hitting a roadblock. But it's likely that any Zonai would have had access to these things, since the whole reason Link himself can use them is thanks to Raru's right arm. When activating the mechanism that gives the hero auto-build, the robot gives a generic response, only telling the authorized user that they can make use of auto-build to mine Zonite in the depths. So obviously this power isn't exclusive to Link, given the vagueness of the response. In terms of continuity, there are some things different about Tears of the Kingdom surface labyrinths when compared to its prequel. The Sheikah shrines are no longer present, replaced with new relics including the Zonai shrines, dragon reins, and ancient tablet found at the entrance. The Zelda team's already given an explanation for the former, suggesting that the Sheikah technology simply disappeared following Calamity Ganon's defeat. I've never been a fan of this statement, although it's not entirely unbelievable. We've seen technology such as the shrines, towers, and columns emerge from the surface, so they could have simply gone back into the ground. But the game does acknowledge the sudden appearance of the tablets just outside the labyrinths, with one of the Zonai survey team entries mentioning that they don't remember it being there prior to the upheaval. Plenty of ruins are now on Hyrule's surface due to falling from the sky, but what's written on it is directly tied to the maze, which has always been on the ground. We've seen some of the dragon reins rise from under the surface, similar to the Sheikah shrines, so perhaps the same is true for these tablets. It's even possible that Ganondorf's awakening activated some sort of mechanism revealing these things, like how the return of Calamity Ganon made the pillars surrounding Hyrule Castle rise. The ancient tablet itself is interesting since its wording can mean one of 2 different things, either talking about the dragon rein in the depths of the current labyrinth, where in this case depths would be the very middle, or the dragon rein in the labyrinth's depths, as in the labyrinth in the depths layer, since another dragon rein is present there. It doesn't really change anything since both mark the beginning and end of the same quest, though I thought the phrasing was interesting. Previously I mentioned how unique these ruins are compared to other Zonai architecture, and while it's sort of off topic, I'd like to talk a bit more about the discrepancies between the old ruins and more modern look in the sequel. The more information we get, the more it suggests that the barbarians, who were believed to have been Zonai, were instead humans who built their entire culture around Zonai, with the more rugged statues being their creations. One of the NPCs comments on how different the design and materials of the 2 types are, even reinforcing the idea that the ones from the sky are, in fact, older than the surface ruins. Something interesting can be found at the entrance to Tobio's Hollow Chasm. Part of one of Breath of the Wild's columns is chipped away. In actuality, this is one of the Sky Island structures, covered up to resemble the ones found in the prequel. The same is likely true for others, examples being the dragon statues. Aside from the different materials and styles, both variations are nearly identical. When I say that the barbarians built their entire culture around Zonai, I mean literally. There's even this dialogue talking about how Typhlo Ruins, a place filled with Zonai structures, was built by Hylians in honor of the sages who fought with Raru. Shout out to user Link for providing this info. With that said, there are some problems with this. First is that the Lomei Labyrinths feel like a mix between both styles, a comment that admittedly comes from a more subjective point of view, but more importantly is distinguishing which designs come from what tribe. Many details found on the Sky Island ruins are carried over to the ones on the surface. It makes sense, as it's implied that the barbarians merely added an extra layer onto these ruins, But one design unique to the surface ones is this twin serpent pattern. Notice how the ruins beneath lack any sort of engravings. And this design appears on all 3 labyrinths, including their sky and depths counterparts. To be frank, I don't think there's any explanation that would solve everything. Honestly, the question of whether or not stuff was retconned is worth its own video, and maybe I'll discuss it one day. While I do appreciate Nintendo's attempt at making a coherent story with the Zonai across both games, I also believe that there was some retconning involved. I don't doubt that they had plans for them in scrap DLC, but as that DLC turned into a whole new game, there probably were significant changes made. I'm sure this will be written off by some as just some dude who's angry about being wrong about the Zonai, but with the little info we had in Breath of the Wild, I think it was fair to assume that this was Zonai related. Truth is, I don't care how right or wrong I was about the Zonai. In fact, there was a ton of stuff in my Zonai content that was completely off. I'm just happy that they play such a huge role in Tears of the Kingdom. Hell, people called us crazy for suggesting that the tribe would even be included in the game. We may never understand the true purpose of the labyrinths, but one of the best parts of these games is asking those questions that no one else asks. If you enjoyed this deep dive, then do consider subscribing for more Zelda-related content, and make sure to check out this video on Unsolved Mysteries from the Depths if you liked this one.